Hello, I'm Brian Fox. Welcome to my channel, I Hate Rock Music. And this video is going to be about a band called Game. And they're still not highly collectible, although at least the first album has been reissued on CD and vinyl editions as well. And a quirky band. I can kind of see why they're still a little bit under the radar and people don't talk about them. Particularly their second album is pretty feel good. And, I know a lot of collectors don't really like bands like 30 Days Out that are real feel good. They want weird, dark, progressive weirdness, which of course I love as well. But some of these, what I've talked about before, these rural bands um, with great harmonies and great playing and kind of a rural feel, somewhat in the vein of mid-period Grateful Dead and that sort of thing. I've really come to enjoy, and this is a band is a good example of that. And they kind of exemplify both the strengths and weaknesses. So let's get into the band a little bit. Came out of Florida, and the band was Eddie Keating on guitar and vocals, Chuck Kirkpatrick on guitar and vocals, Scott Kirkpatrick on drums, Les Luderig on keyboards, and George Terry on bass. And of course, you might know that name, George Terry, because he ended up getting into Eric Clapton's band, and then Chuck Kirkpatrick ended up playing with had a solo album on Capitol Records, and then ended up joining Firefall. So they both those guys landed on their feet pretty good, and the band was together from 1969 to 1978, and they started out in Florida, and then in 1970, pretty early on, they relocated to Southern California, and that's kind of where they belong. And so, to me, they kind of have sort of a Florida sound. And then, obviously, going out to California, they seem to adapt some of the trappings of music from L.A. and San Diego. So, but they have a real sunny kind of feel to them, and there's just something about them that sounds kind of like Florida. So they ended up releasing two LPs. The first LP, I think, is the strongest one because it starts off with some songs where I'm not entirely impressed. They got some really nice harmonies. The songs are basically okay. They're fairly light. The playing's really good. But then they end up with some real standout numbers. There's a little rocker on there called Fat Mama. It's just got all the trappings of a perfect 70s rock band. It's got a great tune called Make Some Music, and then another one called Disturbance that have some really cool instrumental work and a lot of changes in them. There's a weird jazz element to it, and that's one of the things that surprised me the most, particularly a song like Disturbance, where they really get to show that they're really top-notch players. Go through a lot of really interesting changes, a lot of evolution of the material, and then just have this weird jazz influence, and they pull it off pretty well. And then there's a beautiful ballad on there with just gorgeous harmonies called Sermon. And so I really love that first album. I've grown to enjoy some of the material that's not quite as stellar just because I like the whole picture of what they're doing. When you add in some of these interesting, more complex arrangements and this jazz influence, it really makes Game kind of singular in a way, just to have this kind of rural rock and have this kind of upbeat sound and this kind of happy sound, and then throw in these weird arrangements, complex arrangements, and then this jazz influence is something I haven't really heard too many other bands do. So then, and so the first album was released in 1970, and then the second album was released in 1971, and it was a little harder to find. But it's not quite as fascinating as the first record. The kind of like the jazz influences seem to be gone. They moved away from some of the complex arrangements and and longer things, and so it's pretty straightforward 70s rural rock album. But it's got some real stunners on it. There's some great ballads on there. Man in Black, two songs for the Senorita, and Changes are all really excellent and very memorable tunes. Just like the first album, there's a lot of really great harmonies. The harmonies are slightly complex in places. so it gives them a real nice richness on some songs. And just like the first LP with that song Sermon, there's a song called Changes, a nice ballad on the second LP that's just gorgeous. It's really, songs like that are worth having these albums alone. And then there's a cute little song called Animal Friends, which kind of reminded me of something that the Beach Boys would do. But in the middle of both of these LPs, um, you can kind of hear the possibility they could have been commercially successful. It's not necessarily that they're a commercial band. It's just the melodies are really memorable, and the songs are really well constructed. So I could have easily seen a couple hits coming off these records. But again, a band like Game and these two records, they're not going to be for everybody. The bands are a little schizophrenic, a little eclectic. They don't really have a singular vision. There's not a lot of things that just completely blow your mind right out of the gate. Again, these are the kind of records that are good to sit down and listen. And as you listen to them more, then they reveal their own charms and their own personalities. Particularly when you get a band like this that actually managed two records. I mentioned that before in videos. I really, these one album bands are pretty fascinating in their own right, but it's really cool to get two records out of some of these obscure bands before they dissolve into oblivion, because you get a more complete picture of what they're all about, and you also get to see their development. And in a band like Game, for example, the development is kind of backwards, where the first album is actually the better one, and they just get a little too good timey on the second LP. And I understand why they might do that. Of course, the first album doesn't do that well. Um, and then, of course, they're living out there in California as well, so that probably changed how they felt about things. But maybe they wanted to be more charming, more friendly, and get away from the jazz influence stuff and the complexity. So the second LP, they're definitely a lot more straightforward. But I still think they're really cool listens. I love having both these records in my collection. As I mentioned, the second one seems to be the harder one to find, but I think they're well worth it. But again, I caveat that. I know there's a lot of my viewers that are probably going to check these out and think they're relatively mediocre. And I've read a lot of reviews that talk about the fact the band doesn't really deliver that much. But I've also read reviews where they point out all the strengths like I do. And I think that the strengths are great, as I've already pointed out. We have some real quality players that moved on to good success. They got a great rhythm section. Both guitar players are really strong. The vocals are all really good, including the harmonies. And sometimes the material is great. And the ratio of great material to mediocre material is pretty solid. There's a couple clunkers on each record, but over time, I sometimes I can adjust to the clunkers as well, just because I like to embrace the whole personality of the band. And if they thought it was worth putting on a record, putting these songs on a record, and expanding what their personality is, then I'm fine with that. So Game, check them out. As always, the links are below. See what you think. Thanks for watching my channel. I'm Brian Fox.